We're at the Warsaw Security Forum, and I'm joined by Ambassador Michael Carpenter, Special Assistant to the President of the United States and Senior Director for Europe at the U.S. National Security Council. Sir, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, when looking at the recent trip of President Volodymyr Zelensky to the United States and trying to push for his four-point victory plan, it seems one of the main points to this is for Ukraine to be able to use U.S.-supplied weapons, long-range weapons, strike targets in Russia. Yet he walked away from the United States without such approval. Why exactly is this?
Well, first of all, we surged during President Zelensky's visit to Washington an additional $8 billion in military capability to Ukraine. And we're now in the process of having a discussion about strategic alignment on how we help Ukraine to prevail. That discussion is ongoing. Now, you guys in the media, you focus on the long-range strike permissions into Russia, which frankly is not a game changer on the battlefield. What Ukraine needs right now is to mobilize additional men to man the front lines. It needs training and equipping of its new brigades, and it badly, desperately needs air defense systems. That's why President Biden has decided to host a leaders-level Ukraine Defense Contact Group. It'll be called the Ramstein Summit. It's going to take place on October 12th in Germany, and we're going to issue a challenge to other nations, allies and partners of Ukraine to come to this meeting with concrete pledges of support for Ukraine. Now, I can get into the discussion of why long-range strike permissions are not a game changer, but what we do need to focus on is long-range indigenous production of Ukrainian drones. Because when you look at the cost curve, this is how Ukraine wins this war, by being able to attack C2 nodes, logistics, airfields, but not within the immediate vicinity of the border, which is the ATACMS range, but beyond that. And this is the capability that allows them to do that.
We see some of these, what are purported to be homegrown Ukrainian weapons that are taking out big ammunition dumps that are deeper in Russian territory. How can this not help the Ukrainian war effort?
Precisely. You're making my point for me. This is exactly where Ukraine has a comparative advantage. They are so innovative in being able to look at the battlefield picture, to innovate those drones with software, with other capabilities, and then to deploy them in real time into Russia. And you look at some of these strikes. I mean, the Ukrainians have struck as far north as Toropetsk. It's near the Belarus-Russian border. Some of them even as far as the Arctic Circle. This is exactly where their money needs to go, not into permissions to use ATACMS missiles across the border. We designed a campaign plan with the Ukrainians. We gave them the ATACMS missiles to be able to flush out Russian airfields in Crimea and the occupied Donbass. That's where they should be focusing those capabilities.
So basically, if Ukraine wants to hit any targets beyond the immediate borders with Ukraine, it has to use its own systems.
Well, what we did after we saw this incursion from the north in Kharkiv is we said this is unfair for the Russians to have an advantage where basically they have sanctuary on their side of the border. Mm-hmm. And that's when President Biden decided within the matter of hours to authorize counterstrike for Ukrainians to be able to strike at Russian positions across the border using American-provided weapons. Now, we did not extend that to ATACMS long-range systems because, as I said, we don't think that's the game changer. Most of the sorties that are being flown against Ukraine are not within ATACMS range. So they need other capabilities. And those capabilities, that's what we should be focused on, is providing them with the financial means to be able to produce this in Ukraine at cost, because you also have to look at the sustainability of the war here. What is sustainable from an economic perspective as well as from a military perspective? And this is where we think that investment into Ukraine's own defense industrial base is where the future of this war lies.
It's been purported also that the Kursk operation was not shared by Ukraine with its partners, including the United States. Did that operation catch some in the government off guard?
Well, we were not given advanced warning of this operation, which so far has been a tactical and an operational success. It's not clear to me whether that gets translated into a strategic success. But, look, Ukraine is prosecuting this war. It's existential for them. They have every right to make decisions on the battlefield as they see circumstances change. My understanding from my conversations with Ukrainian counterparts is that they saw that the lines were thin in the north and they foresaw potentially a Ukrainian attack into the Sumy region. And so they took advantage of what they saw as an opportunity.
President Zelensky has asked Poland and others to potentially use their anti-air defense, if you will, to protect Ukrainian skies. From the United States' vantage point, would this be an escalatory move if, say, Poland was to shoot down rockets that could potentially, rockets, missiles, drones, that could potentially cross
This
into
is
its
crazy
airspace?
magical thinking. Look,
Yeah.
I mean, what if Poland or other allies want to help Ukraine, give fires to Ukraine, give artillery to Ukraine, give an even better air defense system to Ukraine, or give aircraft to Ukraine. But this notion that, I mean, look at the ballistics, it doesn't make any sense. Poland's not going to be able to shoot down incoming threats to Ukraine from Polish territory. We're talking about hypotheticals here that don't make any sense. And the media tends to fixate on some of these things. And it's not to Ukraine's advantage because what they need is capabilities on the front lines. We're all for Poland donating those sorts of capabilities and our other allies. And that's, again, why President Biden has convened this meeting in Ramstein to meet the Ukrainian needs as they are right now on the battlefield. We encourage all nations to show up with pledges of additional capabilities so that Ukraine can win this war.
The strategy, as long as it takes, it seems to be a very often repeated political term. Is that truly the strategy that the United States and others are employing in this war?
That is not our strategy. Our strategy is for Ukraine to win. We have a classified military strategy that I'm, for obvious reasons, not going to get into here with you. We have a diplomatic strategy, a political strategy. We're working with Ukraine on refining this as conditions evolve.
With the administration in its current final stage, right? Because we're going to have a new president one way or the other come January of next year, but the elections are coming up here in November. Maybe I can ask from the standpoint of a continued Democratic administration, does anything change as far as strategy is concerned concerning Ukraine?
Well, look, I represent the Biden-Harris administration. I'm not going to talk about contingencies in the future, but I think if we can sustain support, it's critical for Ukraine. And so President Biden has now allocated the remainder of the money from the supplemental bill that was passed in April. So the $61 billion that has now been programmed for Ukraine. Some of this will arrive this year, some will arrive next year. But the critical undertaking for the next administration is going to be to secure additional financial means for Ukraine, obviously in partnership with our allies.
With the Ukrainian forces stretched as thin as they are at this point, you mentioned Ukraine needs to bolster its forces, it needs to train its troops, and it needs to deploy them to the proper places along the front lines. Exactly how can Ukraine do that with such a drain that it's seen in terms of population leaving its country and the heavy death toll that we don't know the full extent of, but that has taken a toll on the Ukrainian population?
It's not an easy question to answer. This is a conundrum that we have to work on with the Ukrainians. We think that NATO has some countries that have conscription-based military systems that could help Ukraine to understand how best and most effectively to conduct mobilization and then to retain those troops inside the armed forces over time. It really is a life cycle issue from when you recruit a new conscript all the way through to Veterans Affairs and benefits and medical services afterwards. We can help Ukraine with this, but it's going to take some time. And in the meanwhile, we really have to focus on the training and equipping piece because this is the vital need right now, is to train those incoming recruits and then to equip the new battalions so that they can be operational in the field.
In terms of Russia's ability to sustain this war, it's spending huge amounts of its budget on military and the war effort. How long can Russia continue to spend as it is currently doing so?
Well, look, whatever prognostications I give you now or that were made earlier in the war were upset the minute that Russia began to receive extensive dual-use items from China, as well as missiles and drones from Iran and North Korea. That has sustained the Russians in this war. But look, the way I see it, we have surged a lot of military assistance to Ukraine, where the Western community of countries has perhaps not done as well is in terms of degrading the Russian defense industrial base. Russia's economy this year is growing at 2.5%, 3%. And so I think looking at some of those measures to prevent dual-use goods from flowing into Russia, degrading Russia's defense industrial base is equally important as we surge assistance to Ukraine. And there's a lot of work to be done.
Is that the next focal point for the administration as far as maybe putting pressure on some of those countries like China, like Iran?
Well, we've been telling our European allies and partners that, look, you can't have a relationship with the PRC and not understand and not be vocal about the fact that the PRC is not just enabling Russia's war effort against Ukraine. They are creating a long-term security challenge for Europe's security, because what they're doing is they're providing the propellants, they're providing the machine tools, the optics to create Russian defensive, or I should say capabilities, some of them offensive, that can target European countries in the future. Everybody should be concerned about this, and European leaders should be traveling to Beijing and raising their voices about the concerns they have with this.
Ambassador Carpenter, thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for correcting the media's interpretation, at least from your perspective.
Sometimes you guys need a reality check. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Well, that does it from here from the Warsaw Security Forum. Thank you for joining us, and stay with us for more.